Sampling is a technique when you are doing your research. This technique, this process helps in selecting the individual members or a subset of the population to make certain predictions through statistical inferences, or you draw a conclusion after doing the statistical inferences from them, and you estimate the characteristic for the whole population. So this is your population. You can't do research on this whole big population. That's why you take a small sample. You do the test on this, you get a result, and now whether to know whether what you have predicted for this sample is true or not, that can be done through a hypothesis test. And there are various methods of doing hypothesis test that is discussed in a separate video. Today we will focus only on sampling. Now sampling methods are of majorly two types: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability sampling is the technique where the researcher, he or she will set a selection of certain criteria and will choose the members of the population randomly, and that way all the members will have an equal opportunity to be a part of the sample with no bias, no difference. And in non-probability sampling, the researcher chooses members for research at random. This sampling method is not a fixed or predefined selection process. This makes it difficult for all elements of the population to have the chance to have the equal opportunity to be included in the sample. Now, depending on your research question, your research criteria, you will have to choose probability sampling or non-probability sampling. So under probability sampling, again there are of four types: simple random sampling, cluster sampling, systematic sampling, stratified random sampling. We'll understand all these different methods in detail. Let's understand simple random sampling with an example. It is one of the best probability sampling techniques that will help in saving time and resources, and it is a very reliable method of obtaining information where every single member of the population is chosen randomly, merely by a chance. So each individual will have the same probability of being chosen to be a part of a sample. For example, this is the population and we have to decide our sample. So how will we do random sampling? For example, random means कोई भी, कैसे भी. So I choose this one. So this is my sample. This is my sample. This is my sample. I am not setting any particular criteria. I am just choosing randomly. I can choose this one. I can choose this one. I can choose this one. This one. With no certain any criteria. I am just choosing randomly. So this becomes my sample. This. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is my sample. 7. Cluster sampling. This is the method where the researchers divide the entire population into sections or clusters that represents a population, and clusters are identified and included in the sample based on certain demographic parameters like age, gender, location, etc. And this method makes it very simple for a person who creates a survey to derive effective inference from the feedback. So let's understand with an example. For example, there is a national level study and that wants to know the number of citizens. For example, this is just an example, they want to know the number of citizens who are above the age of 80 living in this country. So they can divide it into clusters based on the states such as CUP, Bihar, MP, Sikkim, Tamil Nadu, etc. So this way of conducting a survey will be effective as the results will be organized into states and will provide an insightful data. Researchers use the systematic sampling method to choose the sample members of a population at regular intervals. Remember, not randomly but at regular intervals. It requires the selection of a starting point for the sample and sample size that can be repeated at regular intervals. This type of sampling method has a predefined range, and this sampling technique is the least time consuming. For example, this is my population. Okay, so I want to select, I have to create my sample now. So if I'm using systematic sampling, there has to be a regular interval. So I decide to choose my sample. Every third person will be my sample. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is my sample using the systematic sampling method, not randomly. Like there is a certain regular interval I am maintaining to create my sample. In stratified random sampling, this is method in which the researcher divides the population into smaller groups that don't overlap but represent the entire population. While sampling, these groups can be organized and then draw a sample from each group separately. For example, here I have grouped my sample in this way. So this is the on the basis of salary. This group earns less than rupees 50,000. This group is rupees 51,000 to rupees 1 lakh, and this group above rupees 1 lakh. So what are the uses of probability sampling? There are three main uses. One is it reduces the sample bias. Using the probability sampling method, the bias in the sample derived from the population is negligible to almost non-existent, you can see. The selection of the sample mainly depicts the understanding and the inference of the researcher. Probability sampling leads to a very high quality data collection as the sample appropriately represents the population. Next, the diverse population. When the population is vast and diverse, it is essential to have adequate representation so that the data is not skewed or not inclined towards just one. And the third one, it creates an accurate sample. Probability sampling helps the researcher plan and create an accurate sample. This helps to obtain a well-defined data. Now, coming to the different types of non-probability sampling. So the first one is convenience sampling. This method is dependent on the ease of access to subjects such as surveying the customers at a very nearby mall or passers-by on a busy street. So convenience, as the term, just the English word convenience means that you are having the advantage of conducting creating the sample size based on your convenience, and it is termed as convenience sampling because the researchers ease of carrying it out and getting in touch with the subjects. The researchers have nearly no authority to select the sample element, and it's purely done based on the proximity and not representativeness. This non-probability sampling method is used when there are time and cost limitations in collecting the feedback. In situations where there are resource limitations, such as the initial stages of research, convenient sampling method is quite often used. Next, we come to the purposive sampling. It is also called judgmental sampling too. It is formed by the discretion of the researcher. Researchers purely will consider and decide the purpose of the study along with the understanding of the target audience. Next is snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is a method that researchers apply when the subjects are difficult to trace. You don't have much information about where else you can find your subject for the research. It will be extremely challenging, for example, to survey, homeless people. So in such cases, using the snowball method, researchers can track a few categories to interview and derive results. Quota sampling. In this sampling technique, the researcher decide and create quotas so that the research sample can be useful in collecting data. These samples can be generalized to the entire population. The final subset will be decided only according to the interviewers or researchers' knowledge of the population. Let's understand with an example. A researcher wants to survey, for example, individuals about what smartphone brand they prefer to use. So the researcher will consider a sample size, for example, of 500 respondents. Also, the researcher is only interested in surveying only 10 states in the country. So here how the researcher can divide the population by quota, by gender, by age. By gender, how can they create the quota? 250 males, 250 females. By age, the 100 respondents each between the ages of 16 to 20, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50 and so on. So this is how the researcher is creating quota according to their research needs and objectives. So these were all the different types of non-probability sampling methods. So what are the uses of non-probability sampling? Number one, it creates a hypothesis. Researchers use the non-probability sampling method to actually create an assumption when there is limited or no prior information is available on that topic. This method helps with the immediate return of data and builds a base for future research. Number two is exploratory research. Researchers use this sampling technique quite often widely when conducting qualitative research or pilot studies or exploratory research. And the last one, budget and time constraints. The non-probability method is used when there are budget and time constraints and some preliminary data must be collected. Since the survey design is not rigid, in this method, it is easier to pick respondents at random and have them take the survey or questionnaire.